Hello, this is Scottish Independence Podcast number 124, and happy Easter if you're into that sort of thing, happy Sunday if you're not, and happy holiday if you got one. This time I spoke with Simone Charlesworth. Simone is a blogger who moved up to Scotland from England in 2012 and immediately became involved in the campaign on the Yes side. She blogs at musingOutloud.wordpress.com. That's musing, MEWSING, because like myself she also has a passing interest in cats and various animals. We talked about her decision to move up and her blogging. The conversation had many aspects about how it is for someone moving up to Scotland from England but supporting the Yes side, but we also talked about the situation we find ourselves in at the moment and how we could go about getting ourselves out of it. Apart from that, just like to say thank you for the people who donated recently, and a special thank you to the person who's put in a recurring donation. It's much appreciated, thank you. So that's all for now, we'll just go straight to it and I hope you enjoy. Hi Simone, how's it going?
Hi, I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, alright. I unfortunately sat through Kezia Dugdale's entire speech earlier on, so a bit down about that. It would just be good for some of the listeners who might not have read your blog. Could you explain about your blog and yourself?
Right, I've only recently started blogging. I did a few pieces last year for a website called Any Voices. The first one was on my opinion of the independence referendum from an English point of view, as obviously I am. So my family moved up in October 2012, just as everything was starting to kick off. Summertime of 2012, I got offered redundancy, and my family and I decided we wanted a complete and utter break, wanted to do something completely different, and wanted to move. And the referendum was coming, and that was actually part of the reason we moved up. It seemed like a fantastic opportunity, the chance of a whole new country, the chance of being out from under Westminster, because with the Tories being in, it just seemed very scary.
Sorry, whereabouts in England were you before?
Lincolnshire. It's the bit just under the Humber, south of Yorkshire, that everyone forgets about. I lived at the end of a very long road, mainly rural, some urban, so coming to Glasgow was a complete change of scene. We kind of said, well, give it 4 years, see how we think. The 4 years is up in October, and it'd take a bomb to get me out of Glasgow. I love it. I loved it within a month. It felt like home straight away.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah, it's a complete change from what I was used to, but it's just fantastic. There's just so much to do, and the people are nice, and it's just a different outlook up here. The area I grew up in was True Blue. I did a bit of research. The previous non-Tory MP was in 1923, who was a Liberal. I then moved for a few years, lived in Grimsby for, 10 years, and it's just Labour. It's, I used to work for the council there, and I used to think, Labour councils, it's maybe just Grimsby, it's just a bit inept. And then we moved up to Glasgow.
Oh, wow.
Oh, no. It's just the same, but on a bigger scale. So I am left-wing, but I had a great degree of cynicism over Labour before we even moved up. And then we moved up and it just got worse. I mean, I was quite excited, Red Clydeside, the history. And then you come up and you see the incumbent Labour Party and you think, just what the hell are you playing at? So, so we moved up and the referendum was starting. We became more active members as it continued.
Sorry, active members of...
Of actually campaigning. Okay. I didn't do as much as my husband did. I kind of did the childcare while he would often stood up and did stalls. But we went to some talks. We went to Kilter. I've seen Robin McAlpine speak. It just enthused me, the idea of a different way, not following the same politics that we've had for the past 30 years in England, and everybody basically singing from the same hymn sheet with just slightly different variations. The thought of actually having a country where everyone's first, where we're all equal, basically starting again from scratch. To me, it seemed very exciting. I'm quite down this week, knowing that we could have been out of this bloody union, and we're still stuck with them, and we've got this fiasco of a budget and this fiasco of a chancellor, and Ian Duncan Smith, and oh God.
Although let's
It's
get
unbelievable.
let's get on to Ian Duncan Smith. Although not literally, that would be hideous. But the the resignation there. I just saw a video with Alex Salmon, and he's basically saying that Duncan Smith has started a Tory civil war there. I mean, is this something we should be happy about? If they're going to start fighting amongst themselves, maybe they'll ignore destroying society for a while. I don't know.
Yes, I've always said the joyful thing of a Tory civil war is there's no innocent victims. It seems strange that people begin turning around and saying, oh, look at Ian Duncan Smith. He's showing his compassionate side. It's like, well, he hasn't been doing for the last 6 years. It's just insane to me that these people can claim to be Christian and yet go around making the lives of the poor and the disabled and the vulnerable so much worse, and doing it saying, oh, we're making your lives better. And you're not. You're making people homeless. You're making people that can manage to keep a roof over their head choose between heating and eating. There's so much misery, and this man had the audacity to come to Easter House and claim he had a revelation and he wanted to make life better, when in fact he's made life worse. I would love to see his reaction if he walked down the road in Easter House. I would love to see how they treated him, if they treated him as a saviour or strung him up from the nearest lamppost, because he's the closest thing to evil. I mean, I always thought Thatcher was bad, but this lot are so much worse. I mean, I've blogged before saying, how do you determine which is the worst of the Tories? Except Duncan Smith always kind of comes out first, and then you look at the rest of the front bench, and they're just. Oh, I find it hard to describe.
I think Gideon Osborne there gives him a run for his money.
He does. He is smug personified, and is just a over-promoted towel folder. And from all accounts, he was a towel refolder because he couldn't even work out the creases. It's these people have things handed to them on a plate and think they've got it on merit.
There's always been that sort of sense of entitlement that some of them have,
Yes.
going through Eton and then Cambridge and Oxford and so on. But I mean, with the fact that they're leaving large sections of British society destitute, quite frankly, do you really think they don't care, or do you think they don't know? Or, I mean, another option there is that their lackeys tell them, their assistants, oh, this is a great idea, this will really help.
It's difficult. They have to know. They can't possibly not know. There's been enough reports and enough people protesting, not that you'd know from the BBC, but the people are complaining, the charities are complaining, the churches are complaining. There has to be, when we're at the state, it's the House of Lords that is protecting us from the Commons. That to me is so extreme. The House of Lords is a group I want to see out. We should not have an unelected second chamber. I have no problem with a second chamber. I think you'd sometimes need someone to double check. But an unelected second chamber that holds bishops is just wrong for the 21st century. And yet we still have it. And these are the people that we have to be grateful for, because they're the ones saying, no, you've gone too far, as they sit there on their £300 a day payments. I mean, any group that contains Michelle Mone is unbelievable.
It's just it's a backslapping exercise. It's a way that they have of rewarding each other.
Yes, it is. It is the donors. The fact that Cameron is trying to stuff more and more Tory donors in. We're going to have the second largest second chamber in the world after China. It has no democratic value. And this is the irony. It's this that's actually keeping us away from them. I mean, I believe Cameron got in on, was it 36% vote? It's mad when you think of the democratic mandate our politicians have up here. Yet they turn around and say, "Oh, we're the one-party state," which we obviously aren't.
No, it's the old line. You can have an elected dictatorship in Westminster, but with only 36% of the vote.
I mean, they talk about a one-party state up here, and yet the good thing democratically about Holyrood is our voting system, because none of the other party leaders, apart from Nicola, got it. They only got in on a list vote. Nobody else stood as a candidate. Nicola is the only one that did. And yet they try and make out we have a lower level of democracy up here when actually ours is so much better.
Well, I think we learned during the indie ref period that they'll say anything, basically, if he thinks it'll grub them a vote. But speaking of vote grubbing, did you have any thoughts on the Labour conference there? Because there were a number of, shall we say, questionable statements and policies. I wonder what your thoughts on the Scottish Labour conference at the weekend was.
To be honest, I didn't see much of it because I just didn't have the heart to. I mean, the one thing I will say is at least they picked a small venue. They weren't rattling around like the Lib Dems were in theirs, and it didn't look like they were seated in a corridor like the Tories did in theirs. They did actually manage to fill their 370 seats. How they must have felt knowing that the SNP the week before had 3,000, it's how the mighty have fallen. The comments that I have heard are astounding. Yet again, accusations of a dictatorship. And then Kezia's comments. I know they have been slightly slightly misquoted with her saying Scotland is only a word. There was a bit more before it.
Yeah.
But the speech itself seems so much more nationalistic than anything I've ever heard coming from any of the other parties. If Nicola stood up and said that, it would have been front pages of all the papers. You don't say, oh, you're Scottish by blood or what. It's who lives here. This was what was so good about the referendum. It wasn't blood and soil nationalism. It was civic nationalism. If you were here, you had a vote. The EU referendum isn't like that. And to me, that just shows how British nationalism, it's so more pervasive, and yet the media doesn't see it as being a problem. It's the norm. British nationalism is the norm. It's every day. It's what we should accept. If you go against that, that's what makes you the nationalist.
Actually, that was something I wanted to get on to you. Obviously, since you've moved up in 2012, you wouldn't really have had that much exposure before to the Scottish media. And I wanted to ask, do you think they're, as bad as what you get down south, or just about the same, or even worse? Because, I mean, there's not much love of the Sun and the Express and stuff down south. I mean, a lot of people buy them, but I don't think you could make the case that they were serving the public any more than the Scottish media or so.
No. The Sun and the Express are seen as a joke wherever you are. I mean, I had to, when we moved up, it was like a huge learning curve because there was just so much about Scottish politics. You don't hear in England, you don't hear anything. I imagine if you went down south and asked, showed up pictures of Kezia or Jim Murphy, people might know who Jim Murphy was, but they wouldn't know who Kezia was. They wouldn't know who Ruth was. They wouldn't know who Willie Rennie was.
I don't think Willie Rennie knows who Willie Rennie is.
No, people down south wouldn't know who the Scottish politicians are. You just don't get Scottish political news in England. You don't get much Scottish news at all, apart from the occasional football thing. So I've come up, and it's been a huge learning experience. Sometimes when I actually tweet who, it's because I'm not being sarcastic. It's because I don't know who they are. Sometimes it's mainly sarcasm, though. But it's just so much. And you come up and you see this new system, and watching First Minister's Question Time was a joy compared to watching Prime Minister's Question Time. Even though we do complain about the repetition and there's sometimes really bad behaviour, it's still so much more grown up. It's a more grown up system. It's less archaic. We don't have all these stupid bloody outfits and traditions. We probably will end up with some, but it just seems a lot more modern, forward-thinking and system. And I like how the actual voting has been set up, that you should have more consensus politics up here. And generally, they do seem to work together a bit better. There is, obviously, in the run-up to an election, a lot more back and forth. But when you think of relatively how few